Hey, well, this is the end of the Cedar Falls' unofficial month of being part of North Dakota. And I say this because this is the third North Dakota-based writer we've had here in like just a few weeks. So Taylor Corby was here speaking for the Alva Leopold lecture, and then we just had Deb Morport, who was doing some stuff here at the Hearst Center last weekend, and now Gary Eller, also from North Dakota. Now, I promise you tomorrow we go back to being part of Iowa, but for tonight, still, we are an unofficial part of North Dakota. So, and we'll hear some about that tonight because Gary Eller is going to be reading from his novel True North, set in the Turtle Mountains. Gary's also the author of the short story collection Thin Ice and Other Risks, and both of those are available in the back. And if you're on Zoom, you know where you can get them because you're already online. So let's hear it for Gary Eller.
Thank you, Jim. I want to make something clear first, and it's not this setup isn't because Jim was concerned that I was so decrepit I wouldn't be able to stand up. But I do want to thank Jim for the invitation and for sponsoring these programs. That's a great contribution. I enjoy coming over to Cedar Falls. I've done it 2 or 3 times. I like being around young people, and at my age, that more pretty much is everybody that I meet. As a matter of fact, I was talking to someone who read my book, a woman, and she was interested in the time period. And I said, well, I go back quite a ways. I almost go back to President Roosevelt. She would have gave me a strange look, like, was she thinking that I was talking about Teddy? I want to single out a couple of people that were important to this book. You've seen them both, heard them both reading tonight. One is Jen Corrigan, who was the first and only editor that I've actually paid, and she was worth every nickel. The other is my longtime friend, Paul Hedin. Paul's fingerprints are all over this book. And in addition to that, he hooked me up with a publisher, and he even provided the title. So thank you, Paul.
In
the segment I'm reading tonight, 2 neighboring families have lived in discord for decades. One of them, the Peavies, is Caucasian. The other, the Mournvilles, is Native American or Métis, the French term for mixed blood. Though there's a small part of, that's only a small part of the problem. The original cause of the enmity is a shooting, the details of which are buried in the passage of time. What remains are only distrust and hatred. The first time he opened his eyes to the misty reality of what he'd done, the boy rolled over and tried to return to a dream. But sleep failed him, and he lay there fully clothed until the arrival of daylight and the demands from downstairs. Casey, chores. The voice from the kitchen below pierced the morning air like a rifle shot. Casey rolled over, dropped to his knees, and snaked an arm beneath the bed, searching. It lay there against the wall, strange amid the dust motes of dead flies. Cool to the touch, it had, in the passing of a few hours, been transformed from an elegant object of beauty and desire to a symbol of disgrace. It was a Zemco 33 rod and reel combo, to which Sears and Roebuck devoted an entire page, featuring a smiling white man in a matching tan cap and vest, pulling in a glistening walleye that seemed to be grinning at being hooked by such superb tackle. Casey had scrutinized the advertisement so intently and often that the paper lost its starch and curled up at the corners. The ad went on to proclaim the revolutionary closed-face design of the reel, its resistance to tangling, its distance and accuracy. Only $16.99 plus shipping and handling, it said, making it $6 less than the price tag attached to the Zebco on display in the glass case at Stagg's Hardware in town. His father called again. Casey? This time the voice carried a tone of taut restraint. As the Moorville family had long gathered, this momentary quiet always foreshadowed the unreasonable, for the man's temperament performed like the motor on the old Minneapolis Moline, idling contentedly until suddenly erupting with a clatter and a cloud of black smoke. Casey's father was sitting upright in his chair, chin high, with one hand squeezing a knife and the other a fork, each pointed toward the ceiling like a cartoon character waiting for his meat and potatoes. What was that you and your brother were up to last night? He asked. The scratching of a knife on toast filled the charged air as he waited for an answer. The response came softly. Nothing. Oh yeah? I could hear the door close when you went out. Casey's mother set the plate of stacked toast and a jar of cherry jam on the table, careful to place the items slightly closer to her husband, who used his fork to spear 2 slices. I seen you over towards the slough. His father thrusted his bull shoulders forward. Was Sam drinking again? Casey hesitated. Well, Casey, you want coffee? It was his mother. She knew well that Casey hated coffee, but sensed that the moment was right to ease the strain. The boy shook his head and snatched a piece of toast. I better start milking, he said, skinning his chair back over the tattered linoleum. The cow was milled about the barn, twitching their ropey tails, waiting to be let into their stalls. Casey located his milking stool, its pine surface worn smooth and its legs loosely connected with baling wire, making the stool sway like a rocker. After securing each cow in her stanchion, he bathed the udder with warm, soapy water while checking for redness or swelling that would indicate mastitis, then used his shirt tail to pad the udder dry. His calloused hands worked to draw the sweet, buttery smelling stream that produced the encouraging tinny sound as it struck the side of the pail. The rumble of the sliding door startled him. The cow's huge head swung around leisurely. Through the cloud of dust particles illuminated by the incoming sunlight stood his dad. Casey rocked forward, gazing down into the white liquid that barely covered the bottom of the pail. His father must be checking on him. The door closed. The gray barn cat paddled by, stopping to assess the possibilities. Casey directed a water pistol-like spritz of milk toward it. The cat dashed off. Casey let his forehead rest on the warm flank of the cow and tried to recollect the details of the previous evening. He had passed Sam's open bedroom door, a rare thing in itself, to see his brother lying on his back with the catalog open on his belly. Here's that fancy rod and reel you've been wanting, said Sam, his eyes trained on the page. As this entire family knew, Casey had been calculating how to come up with money for the Zebco ever since the catalog arrived back in March. Because his father required him to complete his usual chores unpaid, he'd spent Sundays all summer painting the barn with the agreement that after harvest he would be paid $25 for the job. But just this week, workmen pulled up in their truck to pour a cement pad for a new steel grain bin, and his father told him money no longer existed for some useless fishing rod. As he picked up the aroma of liquor in the small room case, he could see the picture of the Zebco in the catalog. He knew the image as well as he knew the trackless yellowing ceiling above his bed. The reel was said to be tangle-free, the nearly invisible monofilament line enclosed in a metal cover so polished it gleamed like classroom floors on the first day of school. The rod, as thin as a straw, was made of fiberglass and so strong it could be bent like a willow branch. Sam reached beneath his pillow and withdrew a pint bottle of his favorite whiskey, 10 high. It looked half full, with a tax stamp on the neck loose and sticking out like a red flag. Sam took a pull, his eyes on Casey as if daring him to object. I know where there's one of them Zebco outfits, he said, smoothing the page with the flat of his hand. The Zebco 33? Really? How much? Sam sat up, planted his big feet on the floor, and raised the bottle to his lips again. Anticipating a reply, Casey studied his brother, unable to shake his sense of shame. Sam was old enough to be out on his own, but here he was sitting in his parents' home in his filthy shorts, smelling of sweat and tobacco smoke, his dirty black hair over his ears, his belly flabbing out like that of a man 3 times his age. I don't know if it's for sale, Sam said teasingly. Who's it belong to then? Asked Casey. Sam extended the bottle toward Casey. Here, have a little taste. Casey knew that kids who drank were looked upon with scorn. Sam himself had been suspended from school after the shop teacher found a bottle in his locker. That misdeed, along with others, produced an effect on Casey. He became known as the nice Moorville boy, a good Indian. He'd earned A's in every subject except for a B+ in speech. Moreover, he'd been chosen president of FFA, the first boy who didn't live in town to be given such an honor. Never mind that becoming a farmer was the last thing he wanted to do. Sam noticed his hesitation. Oh, come on, he said. It's time you act like a man. What a dilemma for Casey. He could almost feel the Zebco in his grip. He accepted the bottle, held it to his mouth and drank. At once he spat it out, wondering about the attraction Sam held for the brown liquid that looked like the pee that sick cows grunted out with so much effort. Sam choked back a laugh. I expected that. Young Mr. Candy ass here never got taught how to drink. He explained that with good whiskey, you swallow it quick before it has time to burn the inside of the mouth. Here, try again. Obligated at this point, Casey saw nothing to do but follow through. The liquid seared his throat but settled swiftly in his stomach. He took another sip. A sense of pleasantness came over him. A warm summer night, the lowing of the cows in their pasture, and the loneliness of the hills made him feel a closeness to his brother that he hadn't experienced since their younger years. So anyways, you interested in that rig or not? Sam barked. Casey turned his head upward. The calendar with the picture of the woman in a bathing suit over Sam's bed doubled in his vision. What? He said. Your Zebco, said Sam impatiently. Casey took a moment. Where is it anyway? Sitting with his elbows on his knees and looking like a man satisfied with himself, Sam lowered his voice. Right next door. That made no sense. Next door? Peavy's. Sam frowned in disbelief. Casey frowned in disbelief. After all, though located almost close enough to throw a rock through a window, the Peavy farmhouse may as well have been in Hong Kong, China. The family's disputes stretched back to before Casey was born. His dad never spoke of how it began, but made it clear to his family that they were never to go near the Peavy place, a rule he enforced with stern threats. How do you know? I've seen it myself. It's in the shop in plain sight. This surprised Casey. I never once saw Mr. Peavy go fishing. That's why that Zebco looks so new, Sam grunted. Shame for it to just hang there, getting rusty. You sure it's a Zebco? Sam's cheerless face turned toward the window. I told you it was. Go see for yourself if you don't believe me. I believe you, said Casey. I just don't want to get shot. You chicken shit, said Sam, pulling on the bottle again. I've been to their place lots of times. and you don't see no bullet holes in me. Casey pondered. The Peavy place, that forgotten cluster of buildings that looked so much like his own home, yet so filled with mystery. From their potato patch, the Morinvilles could almost hear conversations in the Peavy barn, all of it so near, but so unreachable. Apparently sensing Casey's doubt, Sam continued, you take a night like this when there's no moon, you go back round back of the slough and come in from the north. Come on right now, I'll prove it to you. Sam stood, pulled up his pants and waited. Casey got to his feet, weaving slightly. In just one evening, he'd come a long way toward winning the respect of his strange and distant brother. If he didn't show any guts now, more might be lost than the Zebco that he'd likely never own anyway. The black sky speckled with stars. An easy calm blanketed the farmsteads, and at this time of night, no cars passed on the gravel road. As the brothers weaved their way through the high grass bordering the slough, the frogs ceased their rhythmic croaking. The rich smell of cattails and decaying vegetation faded as they neared the barbed wire fence separating the two properties. That's the shop on the right where he keeps it, said Sam, hunching low. You can't see the rod through the window. You got to go in. Casey's apprehension grew as he realized that his brother had no intention of accompanying him. He took in the detail of the building, the door, the single window. He imagined all the things that could go amiss. A barking watchdog might come bounding out of the house, or Mr. Peavy could be crouched behind that shop door with a rabbit gun. Go on, we ain't got all night, said Sam, resting his foot on the bottom strand of wire connecting the two posts. Then, perhaps believing he'd been too harsh, he added, it's okay. Somebody comes, I'll whistle. He lifted the wire. As Casey's whiskey courage faded, he wavered. He wanted only to be safely wrapped in the covers of his bed. The wooden fence post creaked. He knelt slowly, planting his hands in the soft, cool ground, and wiggled beneath the wire, touching for the first time in his life the forbidden soil of the Peavies. Catching his breath, he stumbled toward an alder tree where he shielded himself. He looked back. Sam waved to him. An open area that would be visible from the Peavy house lay between Casey and the shop. He dropped again to all fours, beginning a slow crawl like a caterpillar across the uneven ground, rutted and cratered from the hooves of generations of livestock. Then, wary of encountering some still right manure, he rose and advanced in a careful toe-first step until he reached the shop door where he stood listening. A single mosquito whined in his ear. He waved it away. He barely touched the old-fashioned thumb latch, and the door swung halfway open with a screech powerful enough to wake half the county. He gazed back toward his own house. Sam had disappeared. He pushed past the door into the familiar odors of antifreeze, rotted hemp, and spilled kerosene. But unlike the Morinville shop, this one had been wired for electricity, and a bare light bulb hung from the rafters. Just to the right of the bench, he saw the Zebco, hanging vertically from a brass cup hook, enchanting as a magic wand. He had already made up his mind. He only wanted to lay eyes on it, maybe run a hand gently along the curved reel casing, then depart quietly. Still, the shiny, never-used rod and reel looked out of place in this shed, amid heavy pipe wrenches, bare floorboards, and obsolete machine parts. Like every outbuilding, this one no doubt harbored mice. Cutting with their razor teeth, they could easily chew through the cork overlay of the handle or gather bits of line for their nests. As gently as if removing a robin's egg from the nest, Casey lifted the Zebco from the hook. It clung comfortably to his hand. In a flash, the realization came over him that his brother no longer guided his movements. His decisions and their outcomes were now on his own. Carrying the rod carefully at the midpoint, he pulled the door closed behind him, checked the latch, and took a mighty breath. In the distance just beyond the slough, his home waited. With giddy determination, he trotted across the open area to the fence, this time ignoring a bar that snagged his pant leg. On he went through the reeds, over the soft marsh that bordered the slough with its sickly smell, and then on to higher ground, his feet barely skimming the earth's surface. Yet once inside his porch, a fresh wave of anxiety overcame him. Maybe his father waited at the top of the stairs, rubbing his eyes, his hair a muss. But all was alarmingly normal. On tiptoe, he climbed the stairs to his room. He waited cautiously. He waited with his ears attuned, preparing for calamity. But only the settling and flexing of the old house and the fluttering of a breeze through the cottonwoods penetrated the calm. Leaving the light off, he slid the Zebco under his bed and crawled in, fully clothed. All day, Casey's emotions flopped about like a wounded bird. One second his nerves tingled as if electrified, the next his limbs felt puny and useless. He had to force himself to resist checking and rechecking whether the Zebco was still in its hiding place. He pictured the consequences of his discovery. Forget being FFA president, forget going to college. What might happen at the hands of his father, he couldn't imagine. "You got ants in your pants?" said his dad, peeking over his reading glasses as Casey once again peered out the east window to check for activity at his neighbors. By late afternoon, when it came time for the second milking, he yearned for rest. His thoughts of the Zebco waiting beneath his bed like a boogeyman had not left his mind for 2 seconds since he awoke. At the same time, the people that formed his existence had lost all that made them tolerable and human. His father seemed more stupid and hate-filled, his mother cold and distant. And his ongoing thoughts of Sam, his once beloved brother, who slouched about with a knowing sneer on his face, drove him to tears and disillusionment. Pushing and coaxing the cows into the correct stalls, he concluded that a single opportunity was left for him to reverse what he'd done. If he were lucky enough for Mr. PDV not to notice that Zebco was missing, he just might be able to make his way around the slough again after bedtime and get the thing back where it belonged. By the time he finished milking and turned the cows out for water, a line of pillowy clouds highlighted in orange by the setting sun formed toward the west, a good sign. Rain might keep curious eyes indoors while providing an additional cover. He kept to his room, trying to read a book about genealogy that he'd won in the spelling contest in 3rd grade. His father went to bed. Casey listened for the sounds of his mother on her way to the bedroom, but apparently she chose to stay up late, listening to music and monitoring affairs in Canada over CKY and Winnipeg. At last, the floor squeaked under the weight of her weary footsteps. Casey forced himself to delay another unbearable 20 minutes to make sure she joined her husband in sleep. Carefully, he pulled the despised rod out from its hiding place and crept downstairs, abandoning the doubtful protection of his house. The night gave the impression of being darker than the previous, a blackness that triggered a terrifying memory of the time Sam locked him in the old humpback trunk up in the attic. In a hurry, and trying to escape the recollection, he passed too close to the slough, plunging his left foot into the vegetation-saturated water. As he strained to free himself, the sticky muck engulfed and captured his shoe like a dust mote into a vacuum cleaner. Clumsily, while grasping the rod in one hand, he felt around with the other, but the shoe had vanished. He'd have to leave it, and those were his good shoes. For a moment, he considered tossing the rod into the deep part of the slough, locating his shoe and going home. But the slough tended to dry up in years of scarce rain, and he would always know it lay there awaiting discovery. A jolt of panic hit him when the shop door latch jammed, but a second tug allowed him in. He moved cautiously to the workbench, hoping no mousetrap or sharp tack awaited his bare foot. Securing the Zebco at the proper angle, he backed away to assure himself that it would appear exactly as the night before. Seeing that it failed to hang true, he lifted it from the hook again. The rod felt foreign and wicked, capable of staining the palm of his hand. Brightness flooded the room. "What do you think you're doing?" Casey turned to face the voice, blinking and speechless. Mr. Peavy stood in the doorway, dressed in his long underwear, a light jacket, and a red hunting cap. "It's you," he said, lowering the flashlight in his right hand. "I figured it would be Sam. Is that my good fishing rod?" Paralyzed with fright, Casey tried to think of what he should do with the rod. Mr. Peavy had not moved from the doorway. He waited for Casey to speak. "I was putting it back." The look from Mr. Peavy told Casey that he wasn't relieved. At 1 o'clock in the morning, he held out his hand for the Zebco. Casey passed it over. In the light, the smudges of mud became visible on the reel. "You take anything else?" Casey would remember that this stung the most. Mr. Peavy considered him a common thief. "No," said Casey. "What were you going to do? Sell it somewhere?" "I wanted to look at it," said Casey, resisting the temptation to elaborate on his small lie. Still, the look of doubt compelled him to add something. "I just wanted to see what it was like." Mr. Peavy seemed surprised. With his free hand, he waggled the rod, testing its flexibility, or maybe trying to determine if it had been damaged. "Where do you go to fish?" Casey looked at the man. "Just around here, Dark Lake." Mr. Peavy nodded. "Does anyone else know about this?" Casey considered the question. "Just my brother." "Did your brother put you up to it?" "No," insisted Casey after a pause. "It was just me. Now he brought Sam into it." Another sting of regret. The hurts were piling up. Mr. Peavy studied the floor where muddy, unmatched footprints revealed a trail from the door to the bench. "Where's your shoe?" "Came off," said Casey, "in the slough." Mr. Peavy appeared to be reasoning things through. "So you lost a shoe and you got found with something that don't belong to you. How are you going to explain that to your pa?" Casey had no answer. The requirement to express it all, should it arise, felt like an unfair burden on top of the act itself. Mr. Peavy's eyes bored in on him for a long while. Finally, Casey broke the gaze. "Maybe I could pick bales," he said, his chin on his chest. "What? Talk a little louder." "To pay for what I done." Mr. Peavy looked slow to understand. I'm about all done haying," he said. "I got my tackle back, so we're square on that. As for your Oxfords, that's a matter you need to take up with your folks." Casey glared at the evil Zebco in Mr. Peavy's hand, wishing it would disappear. "You know, something bothers me," said Mr. Peavy, frowning. "Do you even know how to use a rig like this?" "I used a rod and reel before," said Casey. "A spinning reel?" "I don't know. I don't think so," answered Casey cautiously. "You see, this is what they call a closed-face spinning reel," said Mr. Peavy, using his thumb to rub away a smear. "It's quite the design. Use it right, you'll never get a backlash." He raised his hands in a casting motion, but the rod's tip brushed the crossbeam of the small room. "Wait, let me turn the light on." He found the switch. Hesitant, Casey followed him to the cone of light outside, where Mr. Peavy wiggled himself out of his jacket and let it fall to the ground. "Now there's a special motion you use with a spinning rod," he explained. He raised his arm above his shoulder in an easy motion and returned it forward. The lure, with the line trailing, flew into the darkness with a soft whirring and struck the gravel on the road with an oppressive clank. He reeled it in with his left hand. "Once more now, watch," he commanded, and the lure sailed into the night sky, traveled a further distance, and dropped softly to the grass just past the road. "Okay, your turn," he said. offering the rod and reel to Casey, who accepted it cautiously with 2 hands. Here, grip the reel with your casting hand around the reel seat, he said, when he detected Casey's uneasiness. Good. Now your pointer and middle finger go ahead of the reel and your other 2 behind. Right, like that. Now go ahead. Casey imitated the motion, but when he brought his arms forward, the lure and line went nowhere, wrapping themselves loosely around the forward section of the rod. Don't worry, said Mr. Peavy, sensing Casey's discomfort. You play ball, right? Okay, what I want you to do is pretend you're throwing a baseball. He demonstrated with his arm. Try and imagine that you're in center field getting set to throw home. At the place where you let go of the ball, that's when you hit your release button. This time the lure sailed up and out, nearly as far as it had in the hands of Mr. Peavy. That's better, try it again. He stood by patiently as Casey attempted more casts, nodding in silent approval or offering little tips, such as using the index finger to point out the target's direction. Well now, he said after a few minutes, I might as well get myself a little more shut-eye before the day gets going. Just leave the thing in the shop when you're done, but be sure you shut the lights off. With that, he picked up his jacket and walked casually into his house. Casey watched as his neighbor moved about in the kitchen, cupboard to table, table to sink, easily visible in his underwear and red cap. Then, as the house dimmed, Casey resumed the task at hand. As if propelled by their own power, the lure and line traced an invisible path into the blackness of the northern night, into the dark, back to the light, out again and back, darkness and light. Thank you.
Feel free to ask ladies. We have a little bit of time for questions. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask Gary, if you're online and would like to put anything in the chat, feel free to do that as well.
Yeah.
What made you, so it's like a novel of short stories all interconnected, why the form? What
That's a good question. Yeah, it's almost a natural outcome. I had a lot of these stories were published previously. Of course, they had to have a lot of revision. They had to conform to the storyline and so forth. But, so I could say it was sort of an accident. Maybe that speaks to my inability to think up new and original storylines, and it seemed to work okay.
I was wondering if you said a little bit about this over dinner, that you had some interest from a film producer, and that you, as part of this, you were putting together a treatment. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that process, what that was like, trying to take your big long book and do a much smaller treatment of it.
Yeah, I could probably talk longer than it took me to, because I didn't know a thing. I didn't know what a treatment was. I thought that was something that you went in for when you had a sore back. But it's for those of you who were as lacking knowledge as I was, a treatment is a document that is supposed to sell the story, in a sense, to people, to producers who hope make it into a film. It's not a synopsis. It's something else. It's a strange animal that I knew nothing about. It took me a very long time. So.
I mean, did you find yourself thinking differently about what you'd written when you had to do it in this other form?
Yeah, indeed. In fact, I was, before I came on, I was in the reading room going over my manuscript, and I was actually editing it then, if the published didn't seem quite good enough. I found myself starting to think in a different role, as if I were someone who wrote manuscripts for movie or scripts for movies, and wondering if this thing would play correctly, and is that part too subtle? Should I emphasize this? I found it very difficult and not rewarding. I felt also, those of you who are readers, you understand the difference between being told what to write and allowing your thoughts and ideas to come from within in a natural form. And this was really like an assignment to enjoy.
They don't know anything about assignments. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, so speaking of allowing things to come from within, I'm wondering, as a writer, do you respond to, or when you invent your stories, when you begin, do you start with image, character, language, plot, story? And here's why I'm asking, because I heard you read that story, beautiful story. And it's a little bit, I'm reminded a little bit about, did Faulkner say that he wrote Sound and the Fury, and he said he had this image of this little girl in a tree looking into the window of a house. And that was what started that novel. And it was just like a mysterious image. And for you, it felt like there's a boy with a fishing rod in a shed. And it was a beautiful moment when he knew he was making his own decision. I was wondering is that the origin of that story? And how do you usually?
You sound very much like a writer yourself.
I teach writing and you and I as well.
Yeah, right. Well, then you know that the tiniest image or thought, a school bus drives by, a kid leans out the window, and all of a sudden you have the makings of a novel. The kid maybe falls out and somebody comes and rescues him. Maybe he did it on purpose to, and it grows. It grows from this little spark, and it's very rewarding when it grows in a satisfying way, or in a creative way. Sometimes it doesn't always do that. Sometimes it's just a little boy leaning out of a bus window, picking his nose or something.
That's a poem.
Anything else? All right.
Well, I really enjoyed being here. Thank you all for coming. There's nothing like being in a room. People who read, people who write.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, everyone on Zoom tonight.